Ambitious people do things like randomly wake up one day and say, I'm going to run a marathon. They train, and 6 months later, they do it, and then it's on to the next goal. Like reading a book a week or doing the 1,000-pound challenge. For Geraldine DeRuiter, the goal was to write a best-selling book.
There is nothing wrong with writing a book that is commercially successful.
Yep.
There is nothing disingenuous or uncreative about that.
And she hit that milestone, but the high wore off pretty quickly. Yep, she encountered the hedonic treadmill. You know, when you think a goal will be life-changing for your happiness, but the buzz fades away after a couple days. It turns out that this hedonic treadmill tests the limits of goals and ambition.
I have this core belief. And for me, my core belief is I am not good enough.
And we constantly move the goal line because fundamentally at our core, we don't believe that we are enough. How can we break free? Before we jump into today's conversation, if you're an ambitious professional who's stuck on the hedonic treadmill, chasing goal after goal, but never being satisfied, we have a group coaching program for you at radreads.co/coaching. Now, here's my conversation with Geraldine DeRuiter.
Geraldine, I would love for you to start with, if you had a goal, like as an adult, like the goal that you held on a pedestal, the goal that you invested so much time, so much mind space, so much creativity, and it happened. You achieved it. What was that goal?
I wanted to be a published author.
Okay.
That was it.
That was it. Since when?
Like childhood.
Really?
Early childhood. Yeah. So the story I always tell is we had this project when we were in the 4th grade, and it was write a letter to future you. And in this case, future you was 2 years ahead. And they actually delivered it to us in the 6th grade.
Oh, it was actually 2 years ahead. I thought it's like my daughter,
Yeah.
my youngest daughter, she's younger. She knows 3 states of the world: yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So like Halloween was yesterday and Christmas is tomorrow. For the record, it's like April 11th.
Yeah, because time like condenses in weird ways when you've been on the planet for such a small period of time. And I remember when they told us 2 years, I was like, oh, that's so far ahead. And this letter has, I'll never forget what I wrote because it's one of my favorite lines ever. It was, I hope you've finished your novel by now, or at least completed a rough draft. And I was like, damn, 4th grade Geraldine, that's a lot.
Oh.
Yeah. What the hell?
So needless to say, you were a very driven 4th grader.
Yeah, very driven 4th grader. Very driven all through high school and college. It started to peter out a little.
That's what college does.
Yeah.
How so?
And then I think I was tired.
Oh.
I think I got tired. So I was like straight A, 4.0, right? Extracurricular activities, debate, honor society, international club, a bunch of other clubs that I can't remember because they clearly were inconsequential. Drama, the shelf full of trophies. Get to college, and I'm still like working really hard, but now I'm in college, and it's the late 90s, and I have the scholarship, which was the goal. And I'm like, what am I doing? Because all I have to do is keep my scholarship. And I graduated with honors, but I started to question the point of all of it.
Oh, in college.
Yeah, in college.
The Examine Life podcast starting early for you.
No, I got tired. And here's something interesting that came into play, which is I, at that point, was like, well, you need a job because you need to pay your bills. And I met my husband very, very young.
Yeah.
So my husband and I met when I was 21 and he was 22.
Okay.
And at that point, it was basically like, okay, well, we need to, like, he had he had startup dreams, and he was working at this company. He has always been like the pie in the sky person. And I was very much like, well, I need to pay the bills. Like, not that it fell to me, but I was like, we need to be practical here.
He's building equity value. Someone needs to pay the gas bill.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I was like, I kind of didn't care what job I got. And I was lucky that I ended up getting work that was, relatively creative and that let me write.
Yeah.
But the thing that I've always said is, and I say this to my husband all the time, and he disagrees, but I fundamentally believe this is true about myself, is that I am shockingly unambitious.
Whoa. Wow, you've thrown a lot.
Didn't expect that one.
Shockingly unambitious. Okay. I'm gonna come back to that, but I want it like the tired thing. What what did that actually what was that? Can you describe
part of it was, it's the late 90s and it's Seattle. So part of it was me discovering weed, I think, for being truthfully honest. I was like, oh my gosh,
man, Seattle in the 90s, coming of age, doesn't get better than that.
Yeah. So I had short hair and I would go to concerts and I had bootleg pants and just was having fun, and I had always had fun. I wasn't an unhappy person, but I was slacking off for the first time. So I went to high school and I was part of something called the International Baccalaureate Program.
Oh, me too.
Are you familiar?
Cool. I have one.
Okay, so do I.
IB kids right here. Theory of knowledge.
I have. Yep. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I have I got the diploma, did the whole thing. And then I don't know if you had this when you got to college, was it prior to that you had 7 college level courses in high school and all of a sudden they're like, oh, you only need 3 for a full course load?
Probably. But I think I took whatever the mandatory course load was, I took more.
You took. Okay. So, I was taking classes for fun, not for, and I was like, I can take a drama class and get credit for it. What is going on? So I was like, this is great. I was having so much fun and I was getting great grades because it was what had been, a full course load. I now had essentially half of that.
Yeah.
And it was, I have a single mom. And so instead of having to worry about things because I was on a full ride, it was it's dinner time rather than negotiating, do I need to make myself food or did mom have time to cook and leave me food or figuring that out. It's there's a cafeteria. This is great. So I slacked off for the first time. People were cooking for me, which was rad. And I'm just having fun and taking classes. And that was incredible. And I don't think I got my ship righted after that.
Oh, wow.
I think I was what's the easiest? What is the best way to get by without killing myself?
Got it. Do you think that today, sitting here, that's still a life principle? It's what is the best way to get by without killing myself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think,
I'm
and
jealous.
I equate that with not being ambitious.
Oh,
and
okay.
I think that the flip side of that is I say that, but I also have the same thing that I know my husband has, which is I'm not doing it and I should be doing more.
Okay. So take us back. So you had this vision, this dream as a goal as a 4th grader, which is, it's wild because I have a 4th grader as well. So just it's see, we're probably around the same age. So let's say have the bookends. When did you publish your first book?
I published my first book in spring of 2017. It might have been early summer. It was May 2017. So spring, and I was 36.
Yeah. So you published your first book. Take me through the what was the highest high of that first book?
It was absolutely like getting the book deal.
Getting
So
it was actually
yeah,
before you wrote it.
yeah. Well, no, so I sold it. I actually sold that book with the manuscript pretty much
Oh,
completed.
got it. Which
Yeah.
is not typical in publishing.
That's not typical.
Got it.
It's not typical of nonfiction.
Got it. Okay.
It's typical, I guess, of fiction, which
Okay.
is a world I don't know. But generally, if you write fiction and you're not an established author, you're going to present them the whole manuscript.
Got it. So you get this book deal, like walk us through where you were, how you felt.
I'm in my house, right? And I'm I live in Seattle. A lot of major things that happen in publishing happen in New York.
Yeah.
This is still true. So I have an agent, and essentially she is telling me she's sending the kind of the proposal and a couple of sample chapters from the book out to various publishers to see who's interested. And essentially what happens is if more than one bites, you go to auction. And there was more than one who was interested. And so the book went to auction. And when a book goes to auction, it's a blind auction. So essentially they come in with their first bids, and then the publisher will say, all right, well, they'll give, or the agent will say vague things to the publisher like, all right, we're taking first bids on Monday. We're closing it on Wednesday. Just FYI, your bid isn't high enough. And the publisher might say that's as high as we can go, or they might raise it, and they might find out where they might be like, okay, the other person has raised theirs, so you're in a bidding war if you're a publisher, but you don't actually know what the other
the blind
bids
bidding war.
are. Yeah, so it's really interesting, and so the book ended up, it was like mid 5 figures, ended up being the deal, which is pretty good for a like kind of unknown entity nonfiction book. And the book did okay. Like, I'm very proud of it and I was happy with it. But that deal, like when it happened, I was like, holy cow. Like, this is happening. Like, this is actually happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you most like proud of?
I think that I had actually completed the manuscript. I think that completion.
Yeah.
Because man, I've started, I think this is true of most writers. How many books do you start and not finish?
Yeah. So that feeling of like, so intense pride of like doing something freaking hard, strenuous. Do you remember when it starts to fade, or when you're like, okay, I need to jump to the next lily pad?
So, you ride the high on the book deal. And then there's these other moments. And they are, a friend of mine who's in publishing, she said, you have to remember that happiness in this line of work is a little fleeting. And I really do think that is true, because it moves so quickly. All of it moves so quickly. People care about the new releases. They don't care about the book that happened last month. They don't care about the book that happened last year. So you really need to hang on to whatever happiness you can find. And, I had it, right? Like, I had the book deal, which was cool. I had the launch, which was fun. Like, my friends came. I got to, prior to that, I got to see the cover when it was finalized, and that was cool. There were all these moments of excitement, and they were all new. And that was a big deal.
Yeah.
Everything was new because I had never published a book before. And that was so exciting.
Yeah. I'm picturing, because I think of writing a book, and I'm picturing this kind of like Hollywood-ish, like definitely watered down, but people are like, oh, like, I want to talk to you about this, or what are your thoughts on this? And like, you might be featured in like magazines and things like that. Does that happen? That kind of like this kind of attention spike, so to speak?
Yeah, for a little bit. For the first book, not as much,
Okay.
truthfully.
Yeah.
For the first book, not as much. And for the second one, more. And we can talk about like the negative and the high of that.
Yeah.
But there is like a profound emotional, for me at least, drop off. There's like an emotional cliff that you hit at the end of it. Have you had this experience?
Oh,
Like where you're like, oh, it's so cool. And then,
yeah. I mean, my listeners have heard different versions of this, but the classic example for me is working on Wall Street. And so, every year, 90% of your compensation gets paid out in one day, right? So you have these huge bonuses, hundreds of thousands, millions, sometimes of dollars. And you definitely have a really good salary too, but relative to the bonus, it's quite small. And so it's around, usually they tell you your bonus, like right around like Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's, basically. And then it hits your bank account somewhere in the month of February. And so that day is like, you literally, like, I mean, I've been transparent with my listeners. Like, there was one day when I opened my bank account and there was more money overnight than my dad had made in his entire career.
yeah.
And I'll tell you, I mean, I was probably 34 when that happened, 33. I'll tell you that, like, it's like, this is cool. The first thing's like, well, what can I buy? Like, I would always like buy myself. I'm actually, relative to how much money I made, I was a very cheap person. I'm like, oh, like buy myself a nice blazer. Or, I wouldn't even buy myself a fancy watch, like a nice pair of shoes. What can I buy? And then right away, it's how much did that person make? That person, like, did he make more? And Wall Street's kind of, I don't know if it's like this in publishing, but there are ways to kind of extrapolate what people make based on like how their company did or what their stock price did, things like that. So you can kind of like make this like hierarchy, like a scoreboard out. You can kind of guess it. And then people will talk about the scoreboard. Like, oh, like, can you believe, like, and the worst thing was that there was often that person highest on the scoreboard, on the imaginary scoreboard, was not the smartest, which is kind of life and business in general.
Yeah. There's an important lesson there.
But you kind of hate, because you think you're the smartest and you know that you're smarter than that person. So to answer your question, these bonuses were going up and up. I mean, just like every year I was like, I can't believe that they're paying me this much money. And then the next year was like 50% more, 100% more. But it was complete, like, it had completely lost its like your publisher friend, like it was completely fleeting. You're like, cool, huge number, buy something nice, go out to a nice dinner, and then you're like, when's the next one coming? It's like really like behavior
and it's
of an
not
addict.
about, and it sounds like it's not about, and this is a privileged take, but it sounds like in the end it's not about the money. Right? Because you're making more money than you need.
Way more.
It's like, it's this weird gamification of it where it's like, well, you've got to beat your high score from last year and you know exactly what that number was.
Yes. And I think that's why a lot of finance people that move into like tech, internet, influence, it has many of the same attributes. Like you can see how many subscribers you have, you can see engagement. Like that's kind of like the market price of things. And so I think that it's not necessarily a coincidence that I'm like, okay, I'm out. I opted out of the money game in that sense in my mid-30s. But then I just swapped it for another gamified, where it's like, well, how many Twitter followers do I have today? Or what's my open rate on this email I just sent out? And it is this, like, I'd love to hear what you think about this, but I think that if you don't know who you are, and how you value yourself. And I know that that's a very vague, open-ended statement. You cling to a metric to be like, well, my bank account has $1 million in it. So like, I must feel pretty good. Right. But it's a slippery slope. And at some point in your life, I feel lucky that I recognized it early. You're just like, this is like, it's dollars, and dollars are valuable, but you could swap them in for checkers or, seashells. And it's just like you want to count the thing.
Right. And I think it becomes, so obviously we're talking about, there's a baseline of money that we need to survive, right?
Mhm.
We're talking about numbers beyond that,
Yes.
right? Like, and I know that you spoke to a very dear friend of mine for your podcast. You
Yes.
spoke to Will Reynolds. And Will and I have had this discussion a lot because I've known Will for not quite 20 years now.
Mhm.
And so we've both, financially we've moved from very different places from where we started out.
Mhm.
And, he talks about this concept of enough a
Mhm.
lot.
Yeah.
And that is his grounding idea. And so we're talking about, beyond that.
Yeah.
We're talking about an access beyond that. And one thing that came up, and it came up in, I want to say that Will said it, and I'm going to attribute it to him because it sounds like something he would say, is that at the end of the day, what you realize is that money is not the thing that makes you happy.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right. And so you're sitting here and you're like, well, why? Like, shoot, am I ungrateful? There's all of this money in the bank.
Mhm.
And you're like, this is, people don't have this money. And you're like, right, because that's not actually everything for you.
How does that play out in publishing? Because obviously the currency of, you're not getting into publishing in general to get mega rich. I suspect,
right.
Like there are easier paths.
Right. So this is really interesting, right? Because if you start talking to authors, and nobody talks about numbers, right? Nobody ever talks about numbers. So I'm happy to, which might be a bit scandalous, but whatever, here we are. So I made $50,000 for my first book.
Okay.
And I made about $120,000 for my second book.
Got it. This is the advance.
Yes, this is the advance. Those are probably numbers I shouldn't share.
Yeah.
But I feel like we don't discuss this. And so I have been jaw-dropping shocked when I see authors who I consider more talented, have a bigger audience than I do, and are just better writers than I am, who are getting smaller advances.
Wow.
And that, to me, shakes my world in a way that I can't wrap my head around. You're right. This is not why people don't, if you look at it, people are like, oh my gosh, like $120,000 for a book. That's a lot. I'm like, yeah, it was a full-time job for 2.5 years. Yeah. So I'm pulling in about $50,000. I'm pulling in less than $50,000 a year.
Before taxes.
Seattle. Yeah. So and before the 15% that I paid to my agent.
Yeah.
And it comes out in 3 chunks.
Yep.
So it comes out when you get the deal, it comes out when you send the completed manuscript, and it comes out when the book is published. So that's 3 checks, which come out to about $30,000.
Yeah.
That you have to pay taxes on.
Yeah.
Over 2 years. And when you look at it like that, you're like, oh.
And that's like a 120 from the little that I know. That's on the higher end of a book advance.
That's I would say wildly on the tail end. Yeah, wildly. Yeah. I mean, and obviously you hear about these huge advances, and I'm like, those people are celebrities.
Yeah.
So
that's, and so to get back to the question, people don't get into publishing for money is not the number one or maybe number 2 reason.
No.
So how does what's the reward that people want when they get into publishing? Maybe I answer through your lens or just generally.
I think that people want to write books.
Oh.
I think that is it. I think you want to know that you have written a book, that you got a book deal. This is what I wrote, and you can find it in bookstores.
Yeah.
Or you can find it on Amazon. That is a huge part of it.
Yep.
It becomes complex, though, because it is also my job, right? And so I don't want to diminish that, or, obviously I don't want to do it without compensation.
Yep.
But there's this complex thing, and I've seen writers I've seen writers go head to head about it. I've seen people be like, look, don't write if you're looking for money, write because you love it. And then I've seen people respond, no, like you should have that behavior encourages people to think that they should write for free and devalue their work.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Right?
But do you think that can the best book that someone has in like the best book that someone has in them is not always the most profitable book? So let me get like
completely. Yeah, no doubt.
And just for my audience, like it could be like, I know that I could write like a book about, it would be much easier to write a book about productivity, just like a tactical, like productivity 101 book that probably would do pretty well and it would be easy to market. If I wanted to write a book that's more on like life philosophy, A, it's much harder for me to write. B, I'm less of an expert in it. And C, I suspect that the demand for life philosophy books is much lower than the demand for a very tactical productivity book, just like from a market dynamics perspective. And so the productivity book will make more money, most like, all things considered.
Well, I mean, think about the Venn diagram of books that you have read that are fantastic and and books that you have read that are, huge hit bestsellers.
Yeah.
And like there's like a thin overlap.
Yeah. There's an extra wrinkle that I don't even know if I want to go there at the moment, but it's like now it feels like internet celebrity is like
completely
another, it's like the third ring. It's almost like it feels, okay, I actually, can I tell you something that was like it really disappointed me, okay? So Rick Rubin, the producer
Why
extraordinaire.
do I know this name?
He's a producer extraordinaire from like the Dixie Chicks to Jay-Z to Slayer, like just, and he looks like the Buddha. Like he walks around barefoot. He lives in Malibu. He talks in like haiku, not haikus, but like the Tao Te Ching, like little like aphorisms and things like that. But just a really, really likable guy because he just seems so grounded and so spiritual, and his imprints are all over music. He wrote a book called The Creative Act, and it did really well. And I read most of it. It's entertaining. It's solid. But I found out after that it was ghostwritten. And
wow. How did you feel?
Well, I was really, because in my head, I had held him up on this pedestal, especially like when it comes to all things creativity. I had noticed something a little bit strange about him, which was he was doing the Alpha Bro podcast circuit as a guest. So like Huberman, Joe Rogan, Lex, he was like on those shows all the time. So like for someone that seems to like his whole thing is like nothing matters, just put your art and disappear. Like it just felt like it felt a little thirsty, as someone who like tries to get on people's podcasts, like I know what it's like to show that thirst. Right. But it felt, I'm like, you're not. So my radar, like I was just like, this is a little off brand, but whatever. And I shared this with a story. He's like, your intuition was totally right. That book's ghostwritten. And it's on the second page. Ironically, it's written by the guy who wrote The Game, Neil something Strauss.
Which was quite a successful book.
Quite a successful book, but it's about picking up women at bars.
Oh, is it it's that super misogynistic book.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was thinking of The Game referred to the startup world.
Oh, no.
Sorry, that's something else. Is this
also
the one
highly successful?
Is this
book.
the one that introduces negging?
I honestly don't remember. It's not on my. It's never been on my radar of books to read.
Mine either. So that's good. But now I have a new enemy. Go on.
So anyway, I say that because, I just felt disappointed. And some people have books which are ghostwritten, and they put the ghostwriter's name on the front cover, so they're kind of not hiding it.
And they'll put it almost like so and so in conversation with.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like it becomes, this is the person who has interpreted my words.
Yeah.
Which I think, feels honest.
Totally. Here it was on the inside cover in small italics towards the bottom. like kind of where the imprint is, the publishing imprint is. It's like with Neil, blah, 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 Strauss. And it got me thinking, I'm like, this is just fucked. Because it's like he's got this massive platform, and deservedly. Then he's kind of translated that into internet cloud through this like podcast circuit. And then the book is I kind of had this moment. I'm like, what is even real anymore?
Yeah.
And to add in, the book is called The Creative Act. That's like the name of the fucking book.
Right. But he didn't create it.
Yeah.
That, I think, oh man, I wonder too, because Neil Strauss has his own brand. I wonder what the machinations behind that were.
Yeah.
I wonder if someone was like, all right, the guy who wrote the game, like, look, you're kind of a misogynistic a-hole. People are not going to want to read about creativity from you, but you want to write a creativity book. And they were like, we're going to do it and we're going to pay you whatever, but we're going to slap this dude's name on it. And then he's going to get a cut based on whatever we sell above this, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know. That might be too much cynicism. So that's my imaginary scenario for what might have happened here.
Yeah. No. But I go back, we went on this long tangent because there's something beautiful about like fourth grade you that's like, my dream is to write a book. And, 20, 30 years later, you birth this thing.
Yeah, no, that's generous. But keep going.
You birth this thing into existence. You're proud of it. And then there's this other way, and I think every industry is like this, like in finance, they're always like, oh, we're being such aggressive investors for like the local firemen whose pensions we invest. We're like, fuck you, you liars. Like you're doing it because you get paid insane fees. Like stop putting it on the firemen that you invest on their behalf. So I guess that like I hold up this vision of the author, of someone that is like an agent of their craft and prideful and at the same time, there's a bit like anything, there's the business of it. Like, how do you hold those two together?
Like, how do you maintain your artistic integrity in a world where you literally have to sell out?
Yeah, I mean, said more. That's why you're the writer and I'm the interviewer.
No, this is a question, but I also think that I'm going to say one thing as an aside before I dive into this, because I have a tendency to ramble. There is nothing wrong with writing a book that is commercially successful.
Yep.
There is nothing disingenuous or uncreative about that at all.
Yep.
We have this idea that you have to have this kind of artistic purity. Right? Like, oh, I need to be uncompromising in my vision. And it's like, I mean, like, if you meet musicians who are like, I'm uncompromising in my vision, it's like your work is terrible.
Yep.
So at some point you have to serve, the audience.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think needs to be considered. So I do think that creating in this case, because you are creating for ultimately someone else as well.
Yeah.
It can't just be about you.
Yeah. Or else
that
you're
does
journaling.
Involve, right. If you want to just make it for you, have a journal, and then you can do whatever weird stuff you want. You can write, everything can be in haiku or limerick form or rhyming sonnet, whatever you want. But if you're creating it for someone else, it needs to be accessible and, at some point commercially attainable and viable, right? If you're like, I don't want to do any of that, that's cool. Then you can't expect for people to pay for that product, or you can't expect a publisher to buy.
Yeah. And that's not a bad thing, right?
That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing, right? Like, and it is that I think when you go back to this idea of knowing who you are, I think that it is, knowing what your vision of your book is, or knowing what your voice is, as you are going through all of these ways to make it more marketable, and also in the end realizing, I am marketing this thing that I have created because I want people to read it.
Yep.
Because I want people to see my work.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. There are days absolutely when I'm like, man, that, like either that interview was terrible or that person I talked to, like this was bad or that review was bad, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel horrible.
Yeah.
Like I've had those moments. And I've had friends who are far more experienced writers than I am, who are like, nope, I'm writing a book, but I'm not killing myself to promote it again.
Yeah. Can I ask would you say the second book is more successful than the first book?
I mean, I guess it becomes by what metric are we looking at? If we're looking at financial metrics, obviously I got more than twice the advance.
And book sale, I mean, it's been out less long.
It's a national bestseller, which my first book did not,
Got it.
make that.
Congrats.
I think it was thank you. It was a USA Today, an Amazon, and an indie bestseller, which is really cool. The indie one in particular means that like indie bookstores have been selling this,
Cool.
which is really cool. Truthfully, the confession time, it does not feel as special as the first book deal.
Mm-hmm.
The bestseller lists did.
Yeah.
Like that was cool because that was new and different.
Mm-hmm.
But signing the book deal, talking to the publishers, flying to New York to meet with people, it didn't feel as special as it was the first time. And I almost have to take a beat and force myself to remember, what me of 10 years ago, what me of 15 years ago, what me of fourth grade would have said looking at this scenario. And and the advice that someone told me once, which I thought was very valuable, is write down your goals before you start down this path. Write down what you think success is and revisit it, because otherwise those goalposts will just constantly be on wheels and you will move them.
Yeah. Why do you think we do that?
I don't want to say something overly cynical. I don't want to say that like certain people are inherently designed to not be satisfied. But something that my husband says is this is where I bump my head up against the idea that I am not an ambitious person. He says, this is the nature of ambition, is that you move the goalposts.
Yeah. Well, nothing would happen if you did, you would
right?
Yeah. Wow.
Like, what would I have done? In 2017, I would have written the book, right? My first book. I'm like, cool, accomplished. Like, that was my goal. Life goal accomplished. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm done. That feels strange.
Yeah. Even, does it still feel strange in hindsight? Like, now that you've experienced it, you're like, you had this, their second book was, more successful, much more successful than the first one.
Yeah.
But you said that like that first one is more exciting. The whole thing. It's kind of like if you think about it, I use this example often. I mean, I live in this nice suburb where, there's lots of Teslas and Range Rovers and all that.
Yeah.
That might be someone's seventh car in their life, a Tesla. But the first car was the beater Civic that your parents, sold to you at an off-market price.
My Hyundai Excel.
Exactly. And so
it wasn't that. That was like my third car, but it was still special.
And you can't recreate that feeling.
No.
Like you can never, your first anything, right?
Right.
And so it takes us to an interesting place though, because is it like permanent dissatisfaction that it's temporarily satiated by satisfaction? Like, or
what? Yeah. No, or finish it. Finish the thought.
It is permanent satisfaction that is indifferent or that doesn't get pushed around by external achievements.
I mean, what I like to think is that what if we're just looking for things that are new?
Mhm.
And what if there's just always the opportunity? Like, what if there is always the opportunity for
Yeah.
something to be excited about?
Especially with the internet now, right?
Right? But it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I hit the bestseller list. That was cool. I'd never done that
Mhm.
before.
Yeah.
Like that is incredible,
Yeah.
right?
Uh,
Like, and you look at that and I think maybe this is just maybe it's just because our brains want something new and different. And so we
mhm.
want things that, maybe it's just another way of being creative. It's like, no, hit me with something new.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I've read a decent amount of Eastern philosophy and Buddhism and so on, but no
Mhm.
way is an expert. But a friend distilled it in like a very simple way, and he said, in the West, happiness is like a target, and so you take an
Mm.
arrow and you aim it at that target, and happiness is the arrow moving towards the target.
Mhm.
In the East, you're born happy, but you have layers of of suffering
Mm.
that prevent you from seeing your happiness. And so it's like this fundamental belief that everyone starts happy, satisfied, content. You could kind of
Mm.
pick your word, but
Right.
it is an internal thing that we can't tap into.
And you have to return to what is your supposedly natural state of being.
Exactly. And that is why those traditions are big on meditation and contemplation and quiet and stillness and so on, so that you can kind of reconnect with that. Whereas in the arrow and target, you're like, okay, cool, hit the target. Oh, missed the target. You have to, by definition, you have to keep shooting arrows,
Right.
right? And I'm a big believer. I'm not one that's like it's one or the other, Like
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't like to live in. I like to live in the gray, in that
Mhm.
regards. But I'll share like a little bit of a tangent with you, is that I've been going through doing a lot of like attachment work. So basically,
Mhm.
how your therapy around how your caregivers interacted with you.
Sure.
Oftentimes in a non-communicative phase. So like before you were 2,
Mhm.
and that work has showed that like I have a lot of healing to do in that.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and so I bring that up because it's actually interesting in that a lot of that healing might be, if that happiness is internal, there are these emotional scars of how I grew up. And like I grew up, we were like lower middle class, but I never felt
Mhm.
safe. I was small. We lived in like a not
Mhm.
great neighborhood. I got
Where
robbed a
did you
few
grow up?
times in the East Village in New York.
Okay.
And so I was scared walking to school pretty much every day. Even
Wow.
though my parents were fully, like we were not poor in any
Yeah.
way, but I was scared. And so a lot of my dissatisfaction, I've come to learn, is that fear is something that I carry with me. I mean, it's no coincidence I live in one of
Mhm.
the like wealthiest suburbs in LA now, where it's
Mhm.
like you leave your car unlocked, someone steals your sunglasses like once a year. Like that's the only
Mhm.
consequence.
Sure.
And so I think about that, and then I tie it to ambition, where it's like, oh, I've always thought that like that dissatisfaction that maybe the result of feeling unsafe and again things that happened in my childhood, feeling like for the longest time I thought that I would like die alone, because I thought no woman would ever be attracted to me. And
Oh
so
my
like I was
God.
just so sad. I was just like, I'm going to be alone my whole life. This is
How
like my
old were you when you had this
10,
thought?
8, 12. And I've come to learn that my dad's a genocide survivor. And so
Mm.
I've come to
Do you
suspect
mind if I ask, are you
Cambodia.
Cambodian?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so that is, I mean,
That
that
is,
was that was like into the late
yep. That was
70s,
like late
right?
70s. Exactly. And I was born
Yeah,
in
yeah. And you
1979.
were born you were born right at the end. That's what I was just thinking. I was like, oh snap.
Yeah. And
That's yeah.
yeah. So I bring that up to tie it back to the hedonic treadmill, is like, and you hang out with enough entrepreneurs to
Mhm.
know that there is an entrepreneurial archetype that was ignored when they were young and channeled that feeling of aloneness into drive. And then that drive led them to create incredible things, oftentimes highly valuable, made them very rich. But there's still like a disconnect, right? Where, it might be like, you now drive a Ferrari, but the driver is still like a teenage kid, right? In that sense. And so I suspect that, at least for me, a lot of the hedonic treadmill is this confusion of all these different parts of me, which is like, oh, feel safe, work harder, get more results, still feel dissatisfied, but it's ultimately because you still have that not feel safe feeling, go work harder, move the goalposts, feel seen, and so on. So anyway, rant over.
No, but I think that, I think this comes down to kind of the same thing that I was saying earlier, which is like, the money isn't solving, it's not solving the problem.
Yeah.
Not even the problem, but, the way I've heard it described from my own therapy is, I have this core belief. And for me, my core belief is I am not good enough. And so that ties in really well with, okay, you did one thing, it's kind of not enough. That's kind of not enough. So you need to do more.
Yeah.
And all right, well, you did that. It's still kind of not enough, And so it is, and that plays into so many things, right? It plays into my friendships with people. It plays into interactions I have, right? It's this belief that like, oh, maybe I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
I actually had a friend say to me, I can't even remember what the context was. It was her birthday. I had made her a birthday cake. But then I was worried that people wouldn't like the cake that I had made. So I made her a second cake.
Wow.
For her birthday.
Yeah.
So I showed up and I was like, look, you asked for carrot cake, so I made you carrot cake, but I know everyone doesn't like carrot cake. So I also made a chocolate cake. And she's like, and she just pulled me aside and she goes, you realize you are good enough and that I would love you, like, regardless of if you had brought a cake or not.
Wow.
And I was like,
oh my God. I'm like getting teary-eyed just thinking about that.
I know, I am too. And I did my eye makeup, so I'm going to try not to. But I think that that was a very interesting moment because she saw right through it.
Yeah.
And I think that that is something important to have in your life when you have these moments, to kind of tie it back to our conversation.
Yeah.
When you have these moments of, I'm not, I need to do more. Maybe it's earn more money, or it's this. All of it's tying back, right, to this this core insecurity, this core belief, this core problem.
Yeah.
Or this feeling that you have. It's really important to have people in your life who know that feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's hard to let people, I'm speaking from experience, it's hard to let them even know that because it accentuates the belief, right? It's like, if I tell you that I don't feel like I'm enough, like you're going to have something else to hold on. It's all stories, but
yeah.
Ooh,
well,
yeah.
It's also hard. Like, I mean, come on, like it's hard to, especially going back to your point, you're talking about safety and like feeling vulnerable, and like what a vulnerable thing to tell people, like, hey, like I don't always feel safe. And that is this motivating thing that pushes me to, like, I logically know that I am.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I am a rational adult human being who lives in a nice neighborhood. I know I am safe, but that childhood anxiety is what causes me to do all of these things. Right. That's hard. That's a hard thing to say. That's a hard conversation to have.
Oh, yeah.
And it's hard for me to be like, I am not good enough, or I don't think I'm good enough. And that's why I wrote another book. And even though it's doing really well and people are leaving beautiful reviews, I still don't think I'm good enough. And it's nice to, like I said, it's nice to have people who see it and are like, you're being a lot right now. And
Yeah.
maybe you need
Yeah.
to take a beat
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
appreciate that you're not a terrible person and
Yeah.
you've done amazing things.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I want to say you are a beautiful person and you have done amazing things and you
Hard
are
same,
enough.
hard same. Yeah.
But it reminds me. I heard this quote from, I think it's from Einstein, but I haven't been able to like fully attribute it to him. But he says, a problem cannot be solved by the level of consciousness that created it.
Oh,
And so
wow.
I've been
You
thinking
have to
about
be in
that
a
whole.
different headspace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's even more than a headspace. It's like a different plane of existence, right? So if we're trying to, for me, safety, you enoughness, and we're trying to, I'm paraphrasing for you, but like trying to
No.
solve it with achievements, like,
Right.
and accolades, like that we need to move to a different plane, right? And like, what is that different plane? I'll tell you one thing that has really been like rocking my world. I mean, you're catching me in this moment of like attachment work, but they have these, they're called ideal parent meditations. And they're not like, there's not a criticism of your parents because no one has perfect parents. I'm not a
Sure.
perfect parent. And so you go in and the meditation, it'll say, imagine your perfect parents. They're completely attuned to you. They know how you they want to be interacted with. Now picture a scenario where you don't feel safe. How do these parents protect you? What do they do? How do they get close enough to make you feel that they're safe without being overbearing? And they're like, now imagine that they're in a situation where they are just completely in awe of you. What is the look in their eyes? And it's like, and it is like when I think of like what's another plane where I can start to like think about this stuff, I'm like, oh, and it was actually funny. I was doing one of these with my coach / therapist, and she's like, picture the safest room that you're in. And I was like, I can't make it more safe. And like in my head, I was like adding like bodyguards outside. It was like in a compound type gated community. And she's like, what is the safety on like a 1 to 10? I was like 6, 7. And I'm like, I literally created the safest place in my head, but I couldn't get it past the 6 out of 10.
Well, it's interesting too, because what you're describing are all these things that are physical components of safety.
Yeah.
But what you've said is very much like so much of what you've said is talking about emotional safety.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
So, yeah.
I mean, this is why I do this. And it's like, you're a writer, I'm a former finance person. Like
Yeah.
like there's so many, we probably live pretty different lives. But there are like these threads of like, what is it? The core, what your therapist calls the core
Belief.
the core
Yeah.
belief. Like our core beliefs are actually very similar.
Yeah.
And the way that we have tended to them probably are more similar than dissimilar.
Do you clean your house frenetically when you're anxious?
Yes. I can't. I can't do. I can't sit still.
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
like I'm always.
Yeah.
And I have like high blood pressure because of it. Like I can't like.
I have anxiety, but I don't have high blood pressure.
Yeah. So
I got you beat there. Yeah, I am good enough.
Gotcha.
Gotcha.
So, but yeah. I mean, that's what's so special about this is like just seeing other humans through some common humanity, and so I'm just grateful for your openness and
oh my gosh, I'm grateful for yours. Like it's really nice. It's really nice to see like I've seen a lot of non-toxic masculinity lately, and it makes me hopeful for the humanity.
Yeah.
But it's true to your point, like how many of us go around feeling this way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Geraldine, I thank you for this conversation. I thank you for being you. I thank you for helping me and others feel seen and not alone. And this was so fun. Tell us before we wrap. Tell us where our listeners can go find your work and support your work.
Oh, well, before I do, let me
Yeah.
just say thank you as well. I really appreciate your openness and your thoughtful questions, and truly thoughtful in the sense that, like, not just that you are considerate emotionally about other people's feelings, but that you are thinking a lot
Mm.
about what you were asking. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
In terms of where I can be found, I still have a blog since
Me too.
2008. Yeah. So it's everywhereist. So everywhereist.com. And that's probably the easiest place to find me. Yeah.
Awesome. And your 2 books? Shout them out.
Yes, yes. So if you can't take the heat, which is, they're both shades of pink, which I love. But if you can't take the heat, which just came out, you can find it at bookstores. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on IndieBound, basically wherever fine books are sold. And my first one, All Over the Place, which is still very near and dear to my heart. And I think funnier, if I'm truthfully honest. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Geraldine.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.